The concept of two becoming one originates from Genesis 2:24 in the Bible, where it says, "For this reason a man shall leave his mother and father and be joined to his wife, and they two shall become one." Our conversation today is quite the opposite. We are going to talk about one couple becoming two singles because of being unequally yoked, as it is often referred in Christian communities. Our Christian listeners are going to be blessed today, but if you are not of the Christian faith, please don't think you will get nothing of value here today. We are going to hear another survivor's own story from a woman I know you can relate to, no matter where you are in matters of faith and spirituality. Hers is a raw and personal story of a real woman just like you who found herself realizing that she was not well matched with her spouse and what that realization led to in her life. I will let her tell you that story in just a few moments.
Welcome to the Starting Over Stronger show, where you'll find help and hope for your divorce survival and recovery. Divorce well, live well.
Welcome back to the Starting Over Stronger Divorce Survival and Recovery show. As you heard in the intro, today you're going to be hearing another inspiring and thoughtful story of divorce survival and recovery. The goal is for you to know that there are many women in this world who can relate to what you are going through on many levels. And these women you hear on the show have the hindsight and recovery behind them. So they're ready and able to share with you the gifts that divorce has given them. So today, Twoana Clark-Sheppard is joining us, and she is a licensed mental health professional. And I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about herself, just some basics first, and then we'll get into her story in a little bit.
Yeah, so I am so privileged to be here sharing with you and your listening audience. It is such a gift that I don't count small. I always like to start out by saying that because, before I go into giving what sounds like my resume, with all the speaking that I've done over the past probably 15, 20 years, different things become more important to me at different times. And so let's see about me. I am the mother of 3 adult children, and who I mostly raised by myself. Am the wife now of a wonderful man who I actually knew for about between 7 to 10 years prior. We knew each other through a community and spoken word ministry we're both a part of. I am also a licensed clinical social worker. Social work has been my background for about 27 years. And I have been in the counseling for about 15 years. I am currently in private practice, and I have been for about 7 years, licensed in both Kansas and Missouri. I am a licensed ordained minister. I've been in ministry for probably a little over a decade. Those are the things that are the technicals, but my passion really is to just help people be transformed in their mind and in their emotions to experience healing through through a counseling touch, through a coaching touch. I'm also a certified coach, and also through the Word of God. While I do see clients who are not Christians, and I respect where where they come from, what their background and preference is, a hefty amount, more and more of my client load now, people who intentionally seek me out for just connecting to healing through having biblical principles applied to a cognitive behavioral theoretical perspective.
Well, I mentioned in the introduction to the listeners that you are coming from a Christian background and very much rooted in a Christian culture. And yet at the same time, I don't want any listeners who aren't Christians to feel like they won't get something of value here today. And I like to have you start by just sharing that personal side of yourself. But I think it's also important for the listeners to know that even though you're going to be sharing your own personal story, you also have that professional background as a licensed mental health professional, so that they, can hear your heart, but also hear the wisdom of, the strong mind that life's lessons have given you. So thank you very much for sharing that. And I guess now let's just get right to it. Twoana, tell us your story of divorce.
Yeah. So I actually am a 2-time divorcee. So I have more experience than I would like to have had, if you will. Yet the one that I would focus more on, that is kind of relevant for what we're highlighting here, because the first marriage, I was young. I just kind of was trying to escape a lot of things, a lot of childhood trauma. And I, at the time, actually wasn't a practicing Christian, but I had been raised in the church. Different than having a personal relationship with Christ. I'll just pinpoint that's important for me to highlight for people. But I did have this sense of, I never really was able to just kind of be in a dating situation. It was never comfortable for me. And so I was always kind of a one guy gal, if you know what I mean. That was my preference anyway. And so I was doing a lot of escapism with that first marriage. And like I said, we were both young, didn't put a lot of thought into it. That marriage ended up being pretty abusive and toxic in that sense. And I ended up basically escaping that marriage. So I'm thinking that, I'm making a fully informed decision. At this point, I had been following Christ for a number of years. Personally, my own personal relationship and walk with Christ. I had actually even felt the call to ministry prior to meeting this person, but I wasn't quite mature enough to really use discernment and wisdom, also known as just doing my time to do my due diligence to really see if this person was capable of being, first of all, by that time I had all 3 of my children. And so I made a lot of assumptions because this person had children as well and seemed to be just, in this adoration relationship with his children. And so I just kind of thought, well, if he adores his kids. And so, he has the heart of a father. Part of my childhood trauma was pretty intense fatherlessness. My father was an alcoholic who was more absent than he was ever present, both physically and, of course, emotionally, spiritually, all those things. So I didn't have a father in that sense. And so, again, there's some parallels, as always, with people who are married, multiple times when it's, toxic. So still some escapism, but had done some work therapeutically and spiritually, and thought, I kind of had this thing in the bag. And so even still, though, during the courtship phase, if you will, during the dating phase, there were all kinds of red flags. I mean, y'all, let me tell you, there always is, and there was. Okay.
What were a couple of them, the big ones? Maybe?
Well, so let's see. Where do I start? So, one of the things from my lack of healing that popped up during our dating life that was connected to him, but it was still really mostly about my lack of healing, right? So being a single mom of 3 kids, I put myself through school. At this point, I had all of my degrees. I had 3 degrees at this point, right? But because I had escaped the first marriage. Now, I live in Kansas City. I'm not from Kansas City. I'm originally from Iowa and finished growing up in Minnesota. That there's a connection there. So the escape thing happened right after me and my first husband moved here to Kansas City together. A lot of his thing was isolation. I have a lot of siblings. I'm the youngest of 14. And so my first husband kind of wanted to get me away from my family, that we were making this fresh start. He was from the East Coast. My mother at the time respectfully begged me not to go all the way to the East Coast. Kansas City was the compromise. I had one sister here at the time. So here in Kansas City, had escaped from the first husband right around the time I gave my life to the Lord. And so I had, like I said, done some healing work, but still wasn't nearly where I needed to be. And so in this second situation, still some escapism. Though, because of the first marriage and the toxicity of how I got out of it, I ended up living in low-income housing. And I didn't realize it at the time, but now we're into the second dating situation with my second husband. And he came from a background where they were kind of middle-class family with an upper-class mindset. Makes any sense. Okay, so very judgy. He had 2 children. I had 1 child more than him, y'all. Yet, according to his mother and his family, without saying it, there was this thing of, like, oh, she's not good enough. I had 2 more degrees than he did. And yet I was just not good enough. What I didn't realize was that I was hooking myself up to someone who was what we call a mama's boy. So there was just a lot of enmeshment. That's a more clinical term, right? We'll use a lot of enmeshment. And so I thought, okay, all the stereotypes, he seemed to be in love with his kids, and they spent all this time at his mother's house during his visitation. Now, mind you, he also had a previous wife. That was one red flag. He had come out of a marriage and she hated him. That was a red flag. It isn't always. Right. In my case, it was. And if anything, you should do diligence to find out as much as you can, the why. Why does the ex have this vitriol reaction, right? But I didn't. So the one red flag was all the time spent at the mom's. On his weekends, I'm looking at it like, oh, this guy is a great parent, not realizing that, oh, there's something wrong with the fact, though, that he doesn't seem to be able to be in having quality time with his children without his mother being involved. Of course, I bought the story that because the ex-wife was so bitter and so negative things, that was the only time that his mom got to see them, like as if there was this long period of time where she hadn't gotten to see them because of the, negative way their marriage ended, which turned out not to be the case at all. There had never been a gap in time that his mom had seen his kids, but I bought the story. That was another red flag. And so then in the midst of all the judginess, paired up with my lack of healing, so please get that, y'all get that. So my lack of healing said that because I lived in low-income housing, I had just freshly, I had gotten all my degrees, but mind you, I had just freshly gotten all of them. So all the things that you do to save money, to land the job, where you can start digging yourself out of a situation like that and get into, regular housing. I hadn't even allowed myself time to do that. Okay. But what I had done was I had convinced myself that I needed to, have this better standard of living. I needed to, and I needed to do it immediately. Now that was the tape that was playing. Okay. Because I'm now in this relationship and mind you, okay, again, he wasn't living better. He did, he lived in an apartment that while it wasn't low income, it wasn't in this great neighborhood. It actually was an apartment complex that was a co-op where so your rent was pretty much the same as like low income housing rent, if that makes sense. To some listeners, they'll get that. All these things, all my brokenness, all of my lack of healing played a huge, I was just completely clouded over. But because I wanted to belong, I had daddy issues that were not yet resolved. I started, making all these drastic decisions, sweeping decisions. One of them was that I needed to move out of where I was right away. And so moving out of where I was right away put me and my kids in a really not so good situation with this landlord. Mm-hmm. That resolved into us being temporarily somewhat homeless. Now, it was kind of by choice, but it was a bad situation. Okay. It was a very unsafe situation that we were living in. Big, big, big red flag was that he did live in an apartment, but his apartment was, he had extra bedrooms, right? Mm-hmm. So, and his children were only at his house every other weekend. It wasn't even during the week, just every other weekend, because he was still fighting for more time. And so the biggest red flag was that there was this just sense of like, oh, I don't know. I just can't help you guys. Now, mind you, it wasn't like we were inserting ourselves in his apartment. It was more like he was the main one, pointing out all these red flags and all these problems with where I lived and really, really hyping up my anxiety about the unsafety of the situation. He had already started like hinting around, kind of more like the, Cinderella version of talking about marriage, kind of thing. So we had already had like these conversations where we saw the relationship going, and then all this stuff happened with, my housing. And he was kind of like, well, you guys can come stay here, but kind of thing. So we came and we stayed at his place. However, the moment that we started staying there, I started seeing this really very anxious, nitpicky side to him.
Today's episode is sponsored by Cutrera Law, helping people when bad things happen. Kansas City divorce attorney Nick Cutrera has been offering strong yet compassionate legal representation for almost 2 decades. Voted best of the bar 7 times and the coveted super lawyer 3 years running, he's earned these honors as an effective litigator who works hard to avoid litigation where fair settlements are possible. Every case is different. Cutrera Law successfully tries or settles cases where both parents gain substantial, meaningful contact with children, or which a parent's visitation is restricted based on the best interests of the kids. Also, increasing or decreasing child support based on present financial circumstances. Each case is litigated according to its own merit. The choice of an attorney is a personal decision that should not be made based on advertising alone. As always, Starting Over Stronger Coaching recommends interviewing a few attorneys before making your selection. If you are in the Kansas City area, I highly recommend making Nick Cutrera one of those calls. Call Cutrera Law at 816-525-5226 or visit CutreraLaw.com. That's CutreraLaw.com. Please tell them you heard about them on Starting Over Stronger. Now back to the show.
Back to the daddy issues. One of my father's issues, his personality traits, was that he was what I call a fusser. So he would, fuss about the littlest of things, but it was like loud fussing. Okay. That's the best way to describe it, because it wasn't quite like going crazy, but it definitely was not kind or compassionate. And so it was this loud fussing, and it was, you moved my, my artifact off the table, kind of thing. Because, if you don't fix it, you'll pick it. That was a big red flag. So it's so much of a red flag that I hurried up through another friend, found another landlord that didn't take you through a whole lot of screening, because mind you, at that point, I didn't have the best rating credit wise and all that stuff because I'm still recovering. I'm moving faster than I'm even thinking. And subconsciously not realizing I'm being led by getting the approval, right, of this guy, which also meant the ultimate approval of his family, namely his mother. Now, all this are tapes that are playing in the background. And yet he's completely ill-equipped to support any of this, right? And so tangibly support any of this, emotionally support any of this. And so I found another landlord that didn't require a lot, found us a place. We hurried up and we moved out of his place. The place that we moved into wasn't really, horrible or anything, but it was completely out of the school district that my children were in. Now, mind you, one thing that I pretty much was always able to maintain was that my kids did not hardly ever go to public school. I, hustled to get private school scholarships. They went to, at the time, very high-ranked charter schools. And so it was important that we were in a certain neighborhood for their schools. So I moved into this house that was in the suburbs. All of us had to drive into the city to go to school, to go to work. I couldn't really afford to furnish the house, but the neighborhood was better. I was sleeping on an air mattress. My kids had beds, but the neighborhood was better. I moved all the way out here. At this point, I had a moment where I could actually breathe in air. And I started really consulting my spiritual mentors and all that stuff. And I for a moment, I broke off the relationship with him. I moved out to this other neighborhood and was trying to focus on letting the Lord speak to how did I get here? This is very painful, and I started really letting God speak to my heart. Well, then he comes in with all of literally the fairy tale, I'm lost without you. Oh my gosh, somebody wants me. Oh, he's really sad. And so I eventually caved. I entered back into the relationship, ended up marrying him. Let's just put it that way. So we ended up getting married. One of the things, though, that we did do, me trying to have some control, when we were literally more officially engaged, the understanding was that, okay, well, we have to get a house. Like, this is crazy, this instability. So in the midst of course, him convincing me to resume the relationship, of course, he made all these, huge sweeping promises. And one of them is that, you're right. You should never have to be, in an unstable situation with your children. That's my job, la, la, la. And so, yes, we'll get a house. And so, we go through this kind of whirlwind engagement, because even though the engagement wasn't super short, it was so packed with trying to find a house, right? And me, finding, and in the midst of that, I found stable employment. Well, I got hooked up with a job as a school counselor through his sister, right? So because now at this point we're engaged. And so I got a stable job, and, so we're on the track to I called it like the divorce recovery middle class dream. We spend the entire, our entire engagement looking for a house. We settle on the house, we get the house, so much so that our actual bachelorette party happened at our new home. None of the other flags really could pop up because we were so busy. And if you know a woman, so this would have been my first real wedding, y'all. Let me give you that. That's important. Because I also was kind of in this bubble of, I wouldn't have noticed anything else anyway, right? Because I was so focused on finally having the wedding of my dreams, because the first time I got married, it was at the courthouse. I'm planning the wedding. We're looking for a house, and everything's going to be roses and lilies and rainbows. And so we have the party. Now, y'all, here's another though, red flag number, 2004. We decided to do a co-ed bachelorette thing. One, because at the time he was also pretending to have this deep passion to dive into Christianity. And I was a for real, Christian. I was for real saved, kind of thing, not perfect, but I was very dedicated to the Lord at the time, had just recently said yes to the call to ministry. And, so I was really serious about my Jesus for sure. I did not think it was, proper for us to be doing like traditional bachelorette stuff. And, unbeknownst to me, because of financial reasons, he went along with it. But at the time, I thought he was doing it because he was trying to share my values and grow in his own. So I thought, the most appropriate thing was not, you going out with your guy friends doing inappropriate things. I was very strong about you going to a strip club is very disrespectful to me. You got to figure that out, buddy. And so that was also, he felt like, this was a way to have all his, fraternity brothers and whoever else come into town, but not feel like they just didn't have anything to do. He felt the need to host them. So we hosted this big shindig at our new house. The other red flag was that his sister-in-law, one of my close friends, caught my future sister-in-law and some other lady friends of theirs, his sister-in-law, in my house talking trash about me. Yeah, so this happened the night before my wedding. Being honest and transparent, I dealt with that by having probably 3 too many glasses of wine. And honestly, I was hungover at my wedding. That's a big red flag.
You've mentioned a lot of red flags. And what I'm wondering is, do you know they're red flags now? Were you sensing anything uncomfortable, even way down below the surface at that point? Or were you okay with those things back then?
Yes, I was definitely sensing them, which is why, to me, the excess drinking the night before, that was an indicator. Like I was trying to numb that abandoning at the altar impulse that I had.
Okay.
I knew all the other incidences that had occurred, and they really weren't fixed. They were just fixed with an apology and distraction.
Yeah.
You know what else I knew? This is the biggest one. I was saving it because people are listening are going to go, what? I was so aware subconsciously that I finagled to where I didn't have to put my name on the house we had. Now, people on the outside would be like, that's not wise. That is not wise. You don't have any, because now you all know, because we're on this podcast, that there was a divorce. But how that was wise, you'll find out in a second. But I did know, to answer your question, I knew down to my core.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's good to acknowledge with people because I think there's such regret with the divorce, and especially when you get out of the fog and you've got a little bit of distance from it and you start seeing the red flags more clearly, then there's just such, sometimes shame and guilt for why did I do it anyway, and I think it's important to note that we all went through that. There were things that we ignored because there were other things that we thought were going to make those other things okay.
Yes. Yes.
I was also wondering how long you guys were married, and you may be getting to this.
Okay, so we were married 5 years. It was 5 years that we were married. No, that's not right. 7 years. I don't know why I said 5.
Well, I'm glad it's a distant memory. Well, and it started out so rough. It makes me wonder if that whole 5 or 7 years or whatever it was that uncomfortable, or if you
Oh,
got comfortable at some point for a
no,
while? Okay.
no, never.
Okay.
Nope. So I'll tell you, ceremony was beautiful. If anyone's familiar with Kansas City, we have Loose Park here. That was
Oh,
also
yeah.
like one of those bucket list things, if you will.
Mm.
And so I got my Loose Park wedding, but guess what? I am again, anyone who's listening who is spirit led, whatever your religion is, when you are spirit led, you see and understand signs of God speaking to you and everything. So my Loose Park bucket list wedding, there were no flowers budded.
Oh, what time of year was it?
It was May.
Oh, wow.
No flowers.
There would be by then.
Guess what? It was an exceptional, excessively hot, and something happened in nature where the flowers didn't bloom. So we had the garden, but there were no flowers.
Wow.
That to me was a sign. Because up to the very moment that I said, because I had gotten an email and a phone call from them, stating like, just so you're aware, we're having issues, this is and that, So, I could have said no. I could have said no the day of. You can always say no. And I mean that. Anyone listening, say no. I don't care if it's the day of. I don't care how Hollywood makes, the leaving someone at the altar, this whole dramatic scene and all of this. And no, this is life. And for me, it was my life and 5 kids' lives that were traumatically impacted by this. And so, we do the thing, it still was a beautiful ceremony, and then we go on our honeymoon to Eureka Springs, Arkansas, get back from the honeymoon. And as soon as we get back, we get in the house. We had a set of French doors, and one of the doors, the pane had gotten broken by like a ball or so. Somehow in all of that, one of the panes of the glass got broken, and he blew a gasket as soon as we got back. And that is indicative of like the whole rest of the time. It was a combination of, me trying to, be, a godly wife and all the things that the Bible describes as that, is trying to be, respectful and temperate and supportive. And at the same time, I've got this pressure of having all these failed marriages. Just in my history of family, I'm carrying all of that. I am dealing with him having a complete lack of ability, let alone desire to actually parent my children. And it was clear. He had kind of just this those are your kids. You guys do your thing over there. I'll do my thing over here with my kids. He was constantly fighting with his ex. She was disrespectful to me. His children were so confused that they were, mainly his older child, was very disrespectful. Because even in the midst of all of my struggles, I still had some my kids would say, good intended for sure, Christian values about how I was raising my kids. I wanted things to be different. I did not want my kids to grow up the exact way, a lot of the way that I grew up. And so we had some basic rules in our home about things you could watch. We just had a lot of values. Once we got together and married, he, pretty much, over time just was like, well, yeah, I know that I said, I wanted to do the Christ thing, but, I'm just going to kind of do me, because that's too hard.
So you had, when you look at all the problems in the relationship, you've got the obvious just discord, disrespect between you two. You've got step parenting issues, blended family issues. Sounds like some anger issues.
Yes.
Obviously the spiritual issues. What would you say was rising to the surface as the biggest or hardest struggle, and how did you try to resolve that?
The biggest, hardest struggle was the difference in spirituality, different value system. Because here's the thing. When you are a spirit-filled and spirit-led individual, that spirit that you're following conducts you're everything. So my way of problem solving goes through the guise of, yeah, I don't like what you did. I don't like what you said, but I don't have the right to just react. I don't have that right without dealing with the consequences of it from, my Heavenly Father. And those consequences spread out through a life. So, yeah, I don't like what you did, but I have to first try to run that through the funnel of grace. Run that through the, kind of treating you the way I would want you to treat me, not the way I feel like you should be treated. The way that you make decisions are geared through prayerful contemplation. And now, while I wasn't great at that going into it, I became really focused in on it. Because for me, the more problems we had, the more I started turning to myself, realizing that all that I could control was myself. So how am I contributing to these problems? That was what I pretty much was sticking to. And I'm still trying to then, kind of get him to come into the realm of, recognizing that was the way we needed to solve problems, because it was less painful, less hurtful. It's more loving. It's kind of like I was hoping that kind of like the love of Christ would draw him in to wanting to love me like Christ loves, like Christ wanted, with compassion, not pointing out my flaws, not pointing out my kids' flaws. That's not love. Even our church family elders, step in and try to give us counsel. And what was rising to the top also was, because of those differences, he was very critical of me, critical of my kids, more so of my kids. So he would basically target a lot of his disdain for this life that he had chosen towards my kids, of my past with their father. And I found out that he was constantly talking about me and my kids behind my back. He had this group of friends, one of which was a female, and our circles were kind of starting to interconnect. And so I'm finding out things that he could have only shared, right, about our relationship, our household, but he put this nasty, dirty, if you will, muddy spin on it. And that became his habit. It was like he was kind of living a double life. It was like, to everybody else, he was the victim of this marriage that he had chosen. He was, he was the victim of these kids, these, horrifying kids that, then the other people that knew me and knew my kids were just like, what in the world, is going on? When people started finding out what he was kind of spreading, because I was very involved in the community. I was very involved in my church, and I was very involved with children. And I was, by God's grace, I was very well liked in my other life.
Right. I want to point out a couple of things that you've mentioned that I think are very powerful. You talked about your lack of healing and your decision to focus on what you could do to help the things that were going on. And you also mentioned that what conversely you experienced him doing was contributing to the problems, blaming, blame shifting, and making himself out to be the victim in all of these things. And those two contrasting viewpoints, I guess, of the world is like critical, like cannot be understated, that every single one of us listening and talking here today has a choice every single day with every single thing we face to either look at our contribution and what we can do to change things, to be a part of the solution, or be a victim and complain and gripe and point out where others are falling short. And that decision that you make, whichever way you go with that, will determine the course of your life, period.
Absolutely. And that's so true. Oh, that is so good. So because a lot of this it kind of dissolved into, we did not share the same values. We both were not believing, trusting, and serving the same God. Therefore, my way of problem solving, again, was, I honestly would say it more lied on the side of humility, even though I screwed up constantly. Mm-hmm. I did get to a point where I became very frightened and angry. And that scary side finally reared up in just like a mama bear fashion. But by then, so much of the damage had already been done. I felt trapped, even in, just socioeconomically, I felt trapped, all those things. However, it still does affect the decision, right? That decision in particular still does affect everything and conducts everything, because even though in the end, what ended up finally allowing me to be liberated from the relationship with God's blessing, because that's the thing I also want to make sure I highlight, is that in my faith arena, there's very strong teaching against divorce. However, there is a strong teaching in the same book, the same manuscript, the Bible, where there are grounds for divorce. And my ex met them 1,000 times over. He did, on top of all of that, end up becoming a serial cheater. My choice to still, though, at the end of the day, hold fast to my values as to how I conducted myself, being faithful. But at the end of it, it was a faithfulness. I wasn't a victim any longer. It was, God, I'm going to trust you, because now I have done everything that I believe you're asking me to do, to uphold the tenets of this, of this covenant, and to be prayerful for my husband's heart and for his soul and for his mind. All of the things that I recognize are toxic about him that have contributed to his behavior. He had some deep trauma that he had not even yet, at the time of our marriage, had not even told his own mother happened to him, had only told like 2 people besides me. So, of course, that was what was driving a huge majority of what his choices were. Nevertheless, it got to a point where it was like he had the ability to make the same choice that I made. And so what I really want people to understand is that my ability to rise after being just stomped down to the very bottom, to the nothing of nothing, all of the fears that I had that drove me into that relationship, I still had to end up walking those out through faith and trust in who God made me to be in the end, to pull my life back together. I still had to trust God to walk out of poverty and a poverty mentality just because I could. I'm not going to say on my own, because that would be a lie, but because I could, because I got healthy. I still had to, learn how to parent, children as a single parent. Now, though, my children have been traumatized to the nth degree by this marriage. They had issues with trauma from lack of parenting from their biological fathers, but there's a difference between the absent trauma effect and the impact trauma effect. Again, there's a difference between the absent trauma effect, so you're traumatized by what you didn't get, and the impact trauma effect. They're both significant, but they're different in how they impact you. And so now my children, who prior to this, even though I struggled, mind you, my home life, because I was so determined to do things differently with my kids, even through dysfunctional marriage, home life was very structured, and perhaps structured because it was a protection. So my children had, bedtime, they had sports. As a single parent, I was just very graced to have them in the top programs, top schools. So we had a very structured life. And because I was a single parent, our house was actually very peaceful for the most part prior to this marriage, right? Because now, mind you, even my first marriage, I didn't really allow us to stay under the same roof for very long because I just wasn't gonna have it. So our home life, my kids went from this kind of very structured, cocooned kind of lifestyle that was, heavily woven into Christian principles. They were very involved at youth church, all those things in a healthy church. I feel like I need to say that. I was very involved. So it wasn't like I sent my kids to youth. I was there with them. And we had a healthy community prior to marriage. And it went from that to chaos. But the ability to rise up from that and still to this day try to help my children now, young adult and 30-year-old adult, my oldest is 30, recover from the trauma. That marriage, by far and large, more than anything, traumatized my children. So the ability, though, to be a stable, healing vessel for my adult children and to help them after walking through, helping them to understand the importance of us all forgiving each other, them forgiving me. They choose it or not choose it, but helping them. That's not something a lot of people feel like they can do, both be part of the cause and part of the solution, but you can't. And if you're a parent, you have to. I had to show them what it's like to apologize. And if you have to apologize over and over again to your adult children, apologize to, even the ex, or if you have to, you clean out the muck and the mire, clean it out. But you do that by first recognizing that, okay, I have to go after my own personal healing like I do air and water. And I started doing that before the divorce.
That's good. Did that help with the divorce process, having that kind of some of that anyway in the rear view?
Absolutely, because he continued to lie and manipulate. Actually do a very similar, sweeping gesture of sorrow and tears. Tearfulness that he did to get me to come back into the relationship all them years before, when God had given me my escape route the first time.
Yeah, but you were awake now, so it wasn't going to work this time.
Wasn't going to work this time. So, yeah, it's important that more than anything, you do two things. If I highlighted two things, it would be do your work.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think that can't be understated, that, sometimes people think, oh, I'm just going to get divorced and then I'll deal with that. There's a lot of value in doing everything you can on one side of the divorce. And then, there's still going to be work to do after, but it's both are important.
The thing is, if you don't heal, you will take the same brokenness into the next relationship.
Absolutely, you will.
Here's the thing. A divorce that just needs to happen is already traumatizing in of itself. So if you don't start the process as quickly as you can, as quickly as you become aware, you're going to leave with such a triple trauma.
Yeah.
If you would have just started the process, you need that, and honestly, to be able to exit the marriage with some air, with some strength in your knees to be able to stand up, you need to be able to do that. But either way, you have to do it, or else you'll continue to transfer it.
Yeah, that's for sure. And, I think you've mentioned it more than once. And I think, a great place to wrap up your story is on the fact that our lack of healing is the issue.
Yes.
All the stuff that toxic partner is doing is on them. That has nothing to do with you.
Absolutely.
What you can do, what you can control, what is truly the issue is why you chose that person, why you continue to stay in a situation that is not good for you, and what you can do differently now. that you
Yes.
see it for what it is. And
Yes.
some of that involves letting go of the shame and guilt of why you picked that person and kept
Yes.
staying in that situation, because
Yes.
everyone that's ever come out of it deals with those things. Those are a reality in a toxic relationship, but the lack of healing in your personhood is the only thing you can control.
That's
And
correct.
that's where all your power is
Right.
in focusing right there.
That is absolutely where all your power lies. And whatever it is that you rely on for your strength, the strength that you need when you run out of natural resources, for me, that is the power of Christ, the power of my faith. Even in situations where you are, in a marriage, and I mean, yes, obviously people listening here are going to be listening as they're recovering, but even if someone's listening to this and they're in it still and they're questioning, this what I need to do, is this where I don't need to be, right? What I would say is another major indicator is if you all are using two different resources that like completely are polar opposites for how you problem solve, and you can pretty well detect that if you just stop and ask yourself that question: how does my spouse problem solve? What do they turn to? If you are using two entirely different things or things that totally oppose one another, then you're going to be in big trouble.
That is an excellent point.
You're going to be in big trouble.
That way.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about this as we were preparing for this, just kind of the aspect of, do we focus on being like the unequally yoked when you say I do to two different things, but ultimately it is problem solving. Yeah. Because problems will come in a marriage. That's They're two different people trying to come together as one. You will have problems. So that's so key. Do you both have trauma? If you do, a lot of people do. I think most people do. Now we've redefined it more accurately. What are your discussions about how you see it and how you plan to deal with it? Are you two actually looking too much to each other in the relationship to fix it? That can't happen. How do you problem solve? You can problem solve completely differently, and you're definitely going to end up not just in two different books, but in two different continents. But ultimately making a decision about how you want to position yourself in life, and whether or not you choose to have people around you who support a healthy version of yourself, and how you position yourself. Is that person healthy? As you go forward, lastly, I'll say, this is the real thing for me is, if you're in this situation, how do you advance forward? You advance forward by literally taking stock of everything that you can control. Because even in recognizing how traumatized my children were, they still, by that time, they were adults. So what can I control? I can only control the resources that I make available to them. I can only control me. Yeah. I can control me and what I reach for. And then by you walking through healthy healing, you will be infectious. You will. That's the one hope I'd like to leave. I love just leaving people with hope. Now that we've dug up all the trauma and tragedy, your healing will be infectious. That is man law. That's biblical law of attraction, whatever you ascribe to. You heal you, and you will be infectious.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for sharing your story. Your vulnerability and transparency are a powerful reminder to all of those listening that we're not alone in the emotions that we feel and the struggles we have to bear. And, we kind of talked about the theme for today being when one become two, kind of a play on words to the biblical concept of two becoming one. And whether someone's a Christian or not, whether their spouse or ex is a Christian or not. And honestly, even whether we're talking about being unevenly matched religiously, or even maybe in a different way, intellectually, financially, politically, or philosophically,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
lesson here in irreconcilable differences. And I think, rather than dig into that, I want to just talk about your takeaway. You said you like ending with hope. That's always what I want to do. I want you to reflect back on everything that you've shared today and all the moving parts of your story. What would you say is the best gift that your divorce and the experience that you went through to get there gave you?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. So the best gift that it brought was the thing that I had been needing to possess since I was a kid. And that was that I am not my parents. I'm not my grandparents. I'm not my older siblings. I love them dearly. I love you all, if any of you ever listen, but I'm not them, because most of them are way older than me. So they'll get the insight. Literally, a couple of them are old enough to be my parents. So but I'm not them. They're not me, but whatever I am, that is a part of them. I get to choose what I want to take and what I want to discard. Okay. So I got a full, confident, firm grip around the power of choice. That's the gift that marriage gave me finally.
Yeah, that's good.
Through all those things, the power of choice. Secondly, that choice did lead me to finally connecting to the healthy partnering world.
Mm-hmm.
Healthy partnering in my life. My current husband, with all of his wonder and all of his challenges, he's a healthy partner.
Mm-hmm.
And together we get to be motivation, inspiration to other people, especially people who knew me back when.
Mm-hmm.
I'm told that oftentimes, without even, he's a very laid back, person, but I'm told that often, that because the people that do know me from back when and maybe know him, that we are an inspiration because they do know what I came from,
Yeah.
So those are the two gifts I would say in that gift, even though my children are adults. I don't know if this one's probably more personally, the biggest gift is that they get to finally see what healthy manhood looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's a gift too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you again, Twoana, for being here and for sharing. I appreciate your time today. And listeners, I hope this has helped you. It is my pleasure to meet you here each week with a new survivor or professional to share their story or to explore those things that are important to you as you go through your divorce. And I'm humbled and hopeful that you are hearing exactly what you need as the show grows. And I'm getting great feedback from you. So please continue to share your topics of interest and any questions that you have as you're listening to the show. And also, would you please take the time now to follow Starting Over Stronger on Facebook, and also SOS Divorce Coach Annie on Instagram, and follow or subscribe on wherever you're listening right now. And rate and review and share the show with anyone you know who is facing divorce. You can email me at annie@startingoverstronger.com if you have any questions, or if you'd like to explore this topic more, or to find out more about divorce coaching. Till we meet again, remember, you do not have to do divorce alone. There is help as you divorce and hope as you are starting over stronger.